Hi, I'm Lucas from Scribal Workshop. This video is the first in a series explaining how to build, draw, construct, scribe, we're going to be doing calligraphy. Let's just put it that way. We're going to use a simplified book hand. This calligraphy hand is a simplified version of the humanist book hand, which was developed in the 15th century in Italy. I've simplified it a little bit to make it more accessible to beginners, but then once you learn this, it'll be easy to get to the full version of it. To start, I'd like to discuss some of the tools you'll need. First, you'll need a ruler, you'll need a calligraphy pen, you'll need a pencil, and you'll need something to write on. Paper or cardstock or something like that works really well. For a calligraphy marker, I recommend this 2mm Elegant Writer calligraphy marker from Speedball, especially if you're just starting out. It's a lot easier to use. The first thing I want to talk about is angle. So you'll notice that the nib of your calligraphy marker is flat. This means that when you hold the pen at a constant angle, moving the pen along that angle will make the thinnest line possible, and moving perpendicular to that angle will make the thickest line possible. Most calligraphy styles start with the idea that you will have thick and thin lines composing the letters. For the simplified book hand, this means that we'll try to always have the flat end of our pen at the same angle. No matter how we move the pen, we will always have the same angle, and that will give us thick and thin lines. We're going to try to stay between a 20 and 30 degree angle. So from the horizontal, we want to be somewhere between about 20 and about 30 degrees. Line spacing is important and can have a drastic effect on how your final product will look, whether it's open or closed looking. For this, we'll focus on a 4 nib width line spacing. This means drawing 4 parallel strokes that are barely touching each other. You can then measure how wide that is and draw lines that are spaced out that far apart. For this 2mm marker, that ends up being about 8 to 9 millimeters, or about 3/8 of an inch. What I'm going to do for this to show you is I'm going to draw the lines just on these 4 marks. Normally what I do is I would measure the line spacing on both sides of the page and then draw my lines. We're now going to focus on foundational strokes. Once you've completed and practiced each foundational stroke, you'll be able to put them together into each letter in the alphabet. The first foundational stroke is a vertical line. I recommend when you do these foundational strokes and practice them, that you do multiples of each just to get the hang of it. The second is a horizontal line. Then a thin diagonal, and then a thick diagonal. I actually recommend practicing your thin diagonal from top to bottom and from bottom to top. It's one of the few strokes that you can do both directions. The next is a bottom curve. Then a top curve. Then the curved vertical, which is the most common stroke in this hand. There's a variation of the curved vertical, which instead of doing the curves at both ends, there's a straight diagonal at the top, and then this normal curve at the bottom. I recommend that you practice these strokes a little bit every day. No more than 15 minutes each day, but even a couple of minutes each day will help you improve. The reason no more than 15 minutes is you'll start to get tired and you'll end up picking up bad habits when you're tired. So come back for the next video where we'll actually be making some letters. So this part is new to me, but I need your help to make this content. We need your help. We need patrons. So as in the Middle Ages we had patrons, we need patrons now so that we can continue being medieval and sharing this content with you. If you can contribute even for a month, it would help. So check out our Patreon and join us on this adventure. The other way you can support us is by checking out our website. We make historic tools and materials, everything from quills and ink to knives and chisels. If that's something that interests you, go check us out, maybe buy something. We'll see you in the next one. Hi, this is Lucas from Scribal Workshop again. This is our second video on the simplified bookhand calligraphy. I went over the basic strokes, the angle and line spacing in the last video. If you haven't seen that, click the link below to watch that video. The tools you'll need today are a 2mm Elegant Writer calligraphy marker by Speedball and the bookhand minuscule handout, which you can also find in another link below. This printable handout contains the full alphabet as well as some extra practice space at the end. So I'm going to go through each letter stroke by stroke and show you what those look like. To practice your letters, I recommend downloading the template and practice sheet from the link in the description. You'll have an example of the letter, the light gray area for tracing, and then extra space to practice your letters. Also at the very back of that is a set of lined paper that allows you to practice. I'm going to start on this lined paper and go through each stroke step by step for each letter. The A is a curved vertical stroke followed by a lower curve. The B is the modified curve stroke with a straight top followed by a top curve. The C is a lower curve and half of a top curve. The D is a lower curve, half of a top curve, and then the modified curved vertical. E is a lower curve, and then a top curve that's smaller. F is kind of a variation of that curved vertical again. A top curve and a horizontal. The G, again composed like the C, and then you add a slight diagonal, vertical, and another half bottom curve. H, modified vertical, and then another curved vertical. I is just a modified vertical with a little dash, or you could put a diamond instead. The J, same idea but a little longer with a backward curve. The K is the modified vertical, top curve, and a diagonal. L is just the modified curve. M is just 3 curved verticals. And that's your first page of practice. I recommend practicing all of these letters as you go multiple times to get the hang of it. But don't practice more than about 15 minutes at a time because you'll start to get tired and pick up bad habits. The next set of letters, N is a curved vertical. O is a bottom curve and a top curve. P. Q. R is that modified curve again with a half top curve. S is a bit weird. It's more of a curving diagonal and then two half curves. The T is a curved vertical and a horizontal. U, two curved verticals. V, diagonal and a top curve. W is two curved verticals and then just another modified vertical. X, two diagonals with a little bit on the end. Y, there's a modification of the Y that mostly uses the curved verticals in the same base as the G. And then a Z, which is a curving horizontal, a diagonal, and another curving horizontal. So again, this is where I talk to you about Patreon. Patreon is a way that you can support us every month and help us to produce these videos and this content, as well as some of the experiments and some of the illuminated artwork that I work on as well. You can also support us again through our website by purchasing things from us. Thank you. Hi, this is Lucas from Scribal Workshop. This is our third video about simplified bookhand calligraphy. Today we're going to focus on the majuscules, or the capitals. Once again, you're going to need a 2mm calligraphy marker from Speedball and the downloadable handout that has all the capital letters ready for you to trace. We'll be working through each letter one at a time, and I'll try to show you some variations of each one that you may like as well. Capitals are probably the most variable in any calligraphy hand and can really help to embellish and make your work look unique. So the A starts with a slanted vertical and then a curve at the bottom. There's then the little flag or the embellishment that goes onto the top. Usually it can be done in 1 or 2 strokes. The second diagonal is very similar to that curved vertical. The other variation is to actually start with a curved vertical, make it actually vertical, and then add your diagonal and your embellishments as well as your crossover. This has a more swooping look, has a different look to it. That flag actually overwent a little bit too far. The B is a vertical, a curve at the bottom, it's at half of a bottom curve, and then the top curve, and then another top curve for the top. You can see this has like a diagonal joint in the middle and the little embellishment. The variation of this is actually to make that bottom curve a little bit flatter and round out the top and add that top curve. So it gives you a little bit different of a join. It's less of a dynamic look. I tried to repair that and messed it up. Bottom curve, top curve for a C. The other variation that I have for a C for this is really just to do a little curl at the top. I actually don't like how that looks. The D, again, straight embellishment, bottom curve, top curve. There's not much of a variation to do with that. The E is that single curve, the two lines that are horizontal but slightly curved. The variation, I just show you a different order to really put them together, which actually allows you to kind of give a little more smoothness to that bottom line. The F is the straight curve, the embellishment, and then the two crosses. Variation of it is to just do the whole thing in a much more fluid direction. The G is a bottom curve, horizontal, a vertical, and then that top curve. The variation of the G, I just seem to do it in a different order, and it's basically the same thing. The other variation of a G is to actually make that section all in one stroke. Then you could curve that top however you want. The H is two verticals and a horizontal, and then an embellishment. Fairly basic. There's a variation of it where you make it look more like a lowercase, but add a little more swoop, make it a little bit bigger, and add that flag. You can also play with different shapes and designs, but understand that if it looks ugly, that's probably not the one you should use. The I is fairly straightforward. It's a vertical and two horizontals. You'll notice with all the horizontals that I'm doing, I'm adding a little bit of a swoop at the beginning and the end. It's not as much as you think. So again, this is some variations and some ideas. That one looks more like a dumb looking L, and so that's probably not a good idea to try that. This next one looks a little more like an I. The J is that vertical, a bottom curve connecting to it, and a horizontal. You can add a little embellishment if you want to. I find that adding that second curve actually sometimes makes it look a little bit more like a T than it does a J. The K, there's a couple of variations of the K. It's more about how you put on that bottom leg. So first one, you get the vertical, you get a curve, you get a second curve, and the variation of it is actually the top curve's about the same, but then your bottom leg kind of sticks out there. This is nice if you're trying to fill space or trying to go underneath and add an embellishment underneath some letters. The L is relatively straightforward. The M, the variation on the M, this one uses all straight and diagonal lines. Variation on the M is basically a very, very tall, normal looking M, like the lowercase m, but it gives you a variation to use. The N, very similar to that M again, and the variation follows the same pattern where you're making a large and tall minuscule N with an embellishment. The O, there's really not another variation of the O. P has a straight vertical, an embellishment, and then your two curves. You can vary the P, changing how that bottom leg looks, changing some different shapes, playing with how it connects together, heights and levels and things, just to give you some ideas of stuff to play with and decide what you want your capitals to look like. The Q, the variation of the Q is really just showing you that you can connect those two curves before you do the cross, and there's not a significant look in the end result. The R, a vertical. Basically this version makes a P and then adds a diagonal. The other variation of it changes those connections a little bit. The S, the other variation of the S is actually to just go at a lower angle for the diagonal. I don't like that one as well. The T, and there are a few variations where you can change the shapes of that vertical, add embellishments or take off embellishments. The U is that tall vertical again with a large curve at the end and then a little bit of an embellishment. There is another variation of the U, but I don't like it. The V really varies with how much of a curve and a point you put on that second stroke. W This one is very much so like just a much larger minuscule W with an embellishment flag. The other variation looks a lot more like the upside down capital M, so you're working with all diagonals, a lot like two V's put together. The X, this one uses horizontals at the top and bottom of those. There's another variation where you use a diagonal, which frankly looks not very good. I don't recommend it for the capital. The Y, you'll notice that this Y looks like the alternate of the minuscule or lowercase y. The other capital Y looks like the other version of the lowercase y. They're very, very similar. It's just whether you add that embellishment or not. The Z, still straightforward, just much larger. You can add a little more swoop to those horizontals. Thanks for joining me. I just want to let you know I'm creating this video series to give you something to work with as we delve deeper into medieval lettering and illumination, as well as other ways of being medieval. There's several ways you can become part of this journey. You can subscribe to us here, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, but most of all, you can support us on Patreon by contributing every month, as well as through our website by buying some of our handmade writing tools. Thanks for joining us.
Space, the final video about simplified bookhand.
Who am I kidding? It's probably not even the last one anyway. Hi, it's me, Lucas, from Scribal Workshop. This is our final video about the humanist bookhand, we hope. We're going to talk about space, or more importantly, letter spacing and word spacing. You can construct every letter perfectly, but if you don't get the spacing between the letters and words just right, things will look strange. In typography, this is called kerning, but in calligraphy, it's just called spacing. First is letter spacing. There are a couple of different approaches to take with it. Let's write the word space. First, you can see that this would look like with the right amount of spacing for our eyes. This isn't the only spacing that looks good with this hand, though. Here it is spaced out a little bit more. I honestly don't like it when it's larger spacing like this with hand-lettered scripts, particularly this one. It looks like I've messed something up. It's also easier to see variances in script, and I actually have a harder time making them look right. Here it is with a little bit tighter spacing. Historic spacing tends to lend itself very heavily towards a tight spacing like this. You have to remember that most historic scripts were used for books written on very expensive parchment, so the more you could fit on a page, the better. Each letter combination has its own nuanced spacing, a little bit different for each one. And it really comes down to what looks right. Most calligraphy projects allow you to play with the letter spacing until you find the right spacing for you and for your project. You'll notice the little curves or the serifs at the ends and beginnings of each stroke help you to space things out. So I'm going to write another word with a fairly tight spacing, which is what I prefer. I'm also going to go back through and clean up some of the connections, just to give you more of a look of connectedness throughout the whole word. You'll notice that when I did this, I also tightened up the spacing for each line and word. If I were to write the same thing again, but to space everything out just a little bit more. So you'll see they actually have a very different look to them, and it can have a very different effect depending upon how you space things out and how you connect things. Letter spacing within words is important to make each word look cohesive, but letter spacing between words is harder to get right because the serifs don't help guide you like they do with this. This is all about making it look right to your eyes to achieve what you want it to look like. Take this famous sentence, for example. This was actually done with a font that I made based on our simplified book hand. So you'll notice very tight spacing on the first line, very broad spacing on the second line, and an intermediate spacing on the last one. You'll notice that the letter spacing on these is actually quite large, and this is because this is a font instead of being handwritten. It's just harder to get that tightness to look right when it's not handwritten. But you'll notice that our spacing between words is only a little bit larger than our spacing between the letters. This one has much broader spacing, which is much more consistent with a more modern typeface. So if we were to write this out by hand, you'll notice that when I adjust the spacing, they actually look fairly different. So the real key to spacing is to just try things. Cut the words apart, move them around, check with the spacing, rewrite it, and see what you think. So thanks for joining us for this one. Again, you can support us all the different ways: Patreon, our website, Facebook, Instagram, all of those. We'll see you later.